APIs. What's an API? Have any ideas of what that is?
Application Programming Interface.
Yes, what does that mean?
It means
What it says.
What I just said. Yeah. Did I stutter? Yeah, exactly. So here's kind of how I want you guys to think about this term. It's a way in which different aspects of your program are interacting with one another. Okay? So let's think about an API for getting power to our device or something like that. What sort of API do we use when we want to power up a laptop? A charger, right? And we plug our charger into the wall. Do we have to worry about any of the intricacies of how the wall is getting us power? No, right? We don't really have to think about any of that stuff. It's all buried behind the wall, some electricity there. All we need to worry about is, well, how do I plug in and get electricity from that? Okay. So when we're talking about APIs, the ones that we're typically going to be interacting with are web APIs, meaning that I'll be able to make some kind of a request to some service somewhere to get some data back. Or maybe I'll make a request to make a change on that service, all right? Now, ultimately, we're going to be creating our own APIs to interact with. But first, when we introduce the concept, I want to interact with some other API that's already built. So we'll demo it that way, okay?
that's data that being shared with users, right?
Correct. Yeah, so some APIs are going to be open in the sense that anybody can use them. We don't need any kind of special key to use them. Other APIs will be closed in the sense that you'll have to set up an account and get some special keys to make requests to their service. Okay. All right, so let's create a React project. Steps, guys. npx create React app, and then I'm going to say the name of my app, so we'll call this React APIs, and then let's open that in code when we're done. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. And then while we're waiting for that, let's take a quick glance at the API that I wanted us to use. It's this one that SpaceX has. Okay. And I'm here on the documentation page, and what it's going to let us know is essentially a number of different things. Is what are the endpoints that we can use with this API? In other words, what kinds of resources can I go and get some data about? So you can, what's that? Missions?
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, I was probably going to lean in that direction, but we've got all these different things. We can get information about capsules, cores, dragons, history. Never really understood what this dragons thing was.
That's a capsule.
Is it? Oh yeah, it is type capsule. You're absolutely right. Okay. Launch pads. Wow, all kinds of stuff. Missions, I think, is probably the easiest to handle. So as you guys can see here, if I make a request to this endpoint, it should return all missions. Okay? So that's something that I'm thinking we'll probably be able to iterate through. Right? It would be a nice array for us. Okay. So I've got my project created here. Let's open up the source here. We'll go into our app.js. I'm going to create a new folder, as we typically do, just to house our components, right? Oops. Components. All right, and then inside here, let's create a component that we're going to use to basically render out all of these missions. Okay, so I'll call it missions.js. All right, what do I need at the top of this guy? React. Okay. Probably. Why do you think we might? Okay. Yeah, so what's going to happen is when this component first loads up, am I going to have the data that I want to render? Not yet, right? So I need to go reach out and grab that. So let's also import use state. Okay, and then let's just set up a basic function, right? So say function mission. Let's assume that we're not going to take anything in here. Or missions is what I meant to say. So it's good practice to have the name of the component match the name of the file. All right, and then we also have to export this, right? Default missions. All right. So what am I probably going to do here? In the beginning, as I said, we're not going to have any data about these missions. So how am I going to set up my state, do you think? Yeah, I like that idea. That's very good. So we'll say something like this. Const missions, and then set missions, right? Equals use state. And what does that mean that I'm passing this an empty array? It means that's going to be the initial value for the missions variable, right? Okay. Now let's return something down here. So what I want to do is I'm going to create a little fragment in here because initially we're going to have a button that's going to trigger this to go make the request on our behalf, right? So let's just have button, and we'll say get missions, right? Now what is my, how am I going to handle this button click? Probably want to create a function to do that, right? So we'll say function get missions. Okay, so now's the point where I actually need to make my request, right? So inside the body of the function, this is where we're going to go send off this HTTP request. Now, does anyone know what AJAX stands for? Have you guys heard that term thrown around at all?
Asynchronous.
He's got the first word, asynchronous. JavaScript.
Excel, right? That's
What?
Application?
Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Okay. So yeah, so it used to be that a few years ago people were using XML to pass data from place to place. Now not so much. Now we're typically using what's called JSON to pass data from place to place. Okay? So in order to make our AJAX request, there are a lot of different ways to make AJAX requests, but we're going to import a library to do it. Keep in mind that you guys don't have to use a library. There's a method called fetch that you could use as well. All right, so we've got our terminal open here, and I'm going to install this library. So I'm going to say npm install Axios.
Is Axios for SpaceX or is that?
No, yeah, it has nothing to do with SpaceX. This is just for making JavaScript HTTP requests.
Okay, so we should install that.
Yeah, unless you're going to use fetch. Fetch is like slightly more verbose, not a lot. It's not that bad to use, but
Efficient. Even though you're installing a library.
yeah, Axios is not huge. And let's see, when I import it, it should tell me. So I have this this extension. I think it's called import cost. So it'll show you how heavy a dependency is. I think that's what it's called. If I look at my extension list, import cost, yes. Okay, cool. All right, so this is taking a little while to get going, but in order to use Axios, I need to import that as well, right? So I'm going to say import Axios from Axios. So where's it going to look for Axios? It's going to look at it for itself.
From the React, from the module.
From the node modules folder. Very good. Just wanted to make sure everyone understands. It's coming from somewhere, right? It's not just coming from the thin air. Okay, so this is taking a while to install, but here's what we're going to do. Inside of our get missions function, I'm going to make an Axios Get Request. Okay, so I'm going to say Axios.get, and then here we need to pass in what is the URL that we're making a GET request to. So if I go back to this documentation site, it's telling me here it's just API/v3/missions. Okay, so I'll pop that into a string right there. Does anybody have any idea what that might return?
All the
Stick to your gun.
What were we talking about Friday afternoon? A long time ago, right?
Feels like a long time ago.
Remember that concept of promises? Right? So if I were to save this to a variable, so I'll say get request equals, and I were to log this out right away, what might we see there? We might see this pending promise, right? So it doesn't yet have any data yet. So instead of doing it that way, how am I going to handle when the data comes back? Does anybody remember that promises demo?
That's why it's async.
Yeah, it's asynchronous in the sense that this request is going to take some amount of time. We don't know how long. But then once it comes back, we need to handle it, right? We need to do something. Resolve and reject. We're not creating our own promise here. Who's creating a promise on our behalf? Axios, right? When I call this get method that Axios gives us, that's what's creating a promise. Okay. So how do I respond to the promise being resolved? Assuming that it comes back, how can I handle that? Does anybody remember the then method? .then? Okay. Long weekend, yeah, no doubt. So what do we pass .then?
What you do when it succeeds.
Yeah, exactly. So this is going to be a callback function, right? And for now, let's just console log what we got back. Oops. So I'll just pass that in there.
Do all API GET requests, do they all have built-in promises? Or is it just, well, you said Axios, right?
Yeah, not all Ajax requests use the promise interface. Like if you go really low level and you create a new XML HTTP request, it uses callbacks. Straight callbacks, no promises at all. Yeah. All right. So that's all we're going to do for now. If we get the data back, let's just console log, right, what comes back. If we don't, if something goes wrong, let's console log that error as well. Okay, so how do I attach this to my button? Yeah, we'll say on click, and then we'll just pass in that whole function, right? Get missions. All right, now let's run this project. So npm start. And now one other thing I need to do too, because I don't have this inside my app just yet, right? So I'm going to have to import this. So import missions from ./components/missions. All right, and then instead of all of this stuff, let's just rip that out and render out missions. Uh-oh, something's running on that port. Yes. Okay. All right, so it's still kind of loading up here for us. There we go. So we've got this Get Missions button. Let's open up our console so that we can see what's going on. Console. Oh, by the way, let me show you the network tab too while we're at it. Okay, so if I click Get Missions, we should see that there's a request made. So let's do that. Get Missions. You guys see down here, right? if I click that request, you can see that I got a 200 code back, which means that my request was successful. I can click it and then go to preview. You see how it has this long array of all the data there? So that's pretty cool. It's showing me all the data, and then I can open up each mission individually and look at what's available. So I've got a name, an ID, a manufacturer's, even a Wikipedia link in there too, a website link. That's pretty cool. Yeah, look at that. We got a description. Okay, fair enough. Cool. So now what I want to do is I actually want to change my missions, right, once this thing comes back. Okay, so how can I do that? Yeah, where am I going to do it though? Inside my .then. So I'm going to have this. Actually, wait, let's take a look at our console log first so that we know what we're dealing with here. So our console log actually doesn't have the missions at the top level. What does it have inside? It's got an object, right? Inside the object, I've got this thing called data. And then inside the data is where all those missions were. Okay? So I need to make sure that I'm getting the right thing, because I'm sure a bunch of you guys are going to run into this problem where you're setting something, but actually you just set the top level object that Axios gave you back. Okay? So we'll go inside here and we'll say, I'm going to call this response. What did I just create, guys? A callback function. Good, you're right on it. All right, so I'm going to say set missions, and it's going to be response.data. Why am I doing .data?
The data is, there's the object, the first object.
Yeah, so let me fold it up real quick. So the top level object has a property inside of it called data. So if I unfold that, that's what actually gives me that array of missions, right?
So with the status, with the status, with the status.
Correct. Yeah, and I don't want that in this case. All right, cool. So what we're doing is we're setting our missions, right? Now, so let's actually iterate through those missions. And it's going to be safe to iterate through the missions because in the beginning, they're an empty array, right? So there's no issue with iterating through an empty array. So what I'm going to say is missions.map. Okay? And then this will give me what? It'll give me a specific mission. It will also give me an index. Now in this case, I noticed that each mission has an ID. So do I need to use my index as our key here? I could probably use that ID because you can tell that each one of those is unique. So that's all right. All right, so let's just say we're going to take a mission here. And what I'm going to render out will just be, actually, do we want to do this in like a table or something like that? Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's create that, and then we'll create our T head. Did that sound like one of those newer songs or something to me? That was really weird. Sounded like some auto-tuned vocals. Okay, so we'll have a name of the mission, and then we'll have a description, something like that, right? That's probably enough. So inside my T head, let's create a couple THs. Wow. This is really getting great. All right, so name, description. Okay, and then I'm going to create my little T-body element. Oops. T-body. Okay. And then inside the T body, I'm basically going to, this is where my iteration is going to happen, right? So let's bring that up. Okay, and then for each one of these guys, I'm going to render out a T row element, right? So my key, as we said, was going to be what? The mission ID, which actually is not just ID, it's called mission underscore ID. So I'll say mission dot mission underscore ID. Okay, and then I'll have a couple TD elements, right? So what am I going to put in here? It's probably like mission name or something. Yeah, it's mission underscore name. Mission underscore name. And then here, description is actually by itself, so that's cool. Description. All right, fair enough. Oh, whoops. React gets a little angry if you do bad HTML. So I should have wrapped these in a row, so I can do that now. So let's just do wrap with abbreviation TR. Okay, we're good to go. So now we've got this empty table. I'm going to click on Get Missions. Wow, that doesn't look so great. Yeah, it works. I'm excited about that, but let's. No, I know. But look, let's just shorten it up. Let's say dot slice 0 to 100, and then I'll say plus dot dot dot. To be continued, something like that. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, still doesn't look so great. Sorry about that. But there you go. So now we're able to get all of our missions and actually iterate through them, right? Maybe we should just get rid of description altogether and just do an ID. You guys want to do that instead? I think it'll make our table look way better. In fact, let's just switch the order here. And then let's do this. Mission ID. Dot mission ID. Ah, that's a little better. Okay, cool. Yeah, not so interesting, but that's okay. Because later on, when we continue this demo tomorrow, we start getting into routing, we'll be able to create links that will take us to a page where we can see more information about that particular mission, right? Okay. All right, any questions about what we've done so far? So right now, we're only doing this on a button click. Okay? How do you guys feel about what we've done so far? Pretty good? All right. Now let's assume for a second that I don't want to do it on a button click. I actually want to do this when the page loads. Okay? So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you guys to a new hook. Do you remember when we were doing class components and I said these class components have life cycle methods? The component did mount. We can do something when the component first loads up. Okay? So we're going to do something similar here. We're going to bring in a hook called useEffect. Okay? And the useEffect hook is used when we want to create some kind of side effect in our application. Does anybody know what a side effect is? Yeah, I guess you could say that. So in other words, if we're doing some kind of side effect, it means that what we're doing is impacting something outside this immediate function. Okay? So if I'm making a network request to some other outside service, that's considered a side effect, right? Because we're doing something to their service. We're causing them to have to respond to us. Okay, so here's how we're going to use useEffect. I'm just going to kind of demonstrate it for a second here. We're going to say useEffect, and then what we need to pass to it is, anyone guess? Always, right? Callback functions are everywhere. So I'm just going to create a little anonymous callback function. And then inside this callback function, I'm going to console.log. I'm going to say our use effect callback ran. Just so that we can kind of see when is this actually happening. Okay? So I'll open up my tools here. Okay? You guys see that it's already run. It ran one time. Now let me click this button and load up our missions. Hey, look at that. It ran again. Okay? So in other words, every time I make some change to my state in my component here, it's causing all this code to rerun that's inside the function. Okay? So once I got the missions, we came back up to line 5 and we reran this. Now because we're using this thing called useState, it's not going to reset it back to an empty array, right? It should still have all those missions in it. So basically it's going to discard this initial value and use what we already had in there. But then it's going to come down here, it's going to recreate this function, and then it's going to rerun whatever I had inside this useEffect call. Okay? So how do you guys think we could use this to our advantage to sort of load these guys up when we first load the component?
Place the Axios inside
Yeah, we can make this call inside here. Quick question though.
How do you?
Well, moving the code's not hard, right? I can easily just go like this in there, and then we're good to go. Question though. If this useEffect runs every single time I change some state in the component, is anything going to be able to stop this from running and running and running, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to make the API request, we're going to set the state, which is going to cause the whole component to re-render, come back up here, this is going to run again, we're going to set the state, so to be an endless loop, right?
Do you stop me?
Yeah, I'll show you how. Yeah, you can kind of think of this as a life cycle method, at least in the way that we're going to use it. Okay? So there is an optional second argument to this useEffect hook. You can pass it in an array of variables that you want to be watching for. So in other words, if a certain variable is changed and it's inside that array, it would cause this effect hook to be run again. If I put an empty array, though, that means that it will only run the very first time the component loads. So it's almost like we're using that component did mount that we had in our class components. All right, so let me just comment out our button. We don't need that anymore. What's that?
I like the button.
You did? Wasn't it? Yeah. Pretty sweet. All right, so let's go back here. So let me refresh. It already did it, but again, if I were to refresh here, see we got our data. Yeah, it was super fast. And let me clear this out too, so that we don't keep seeing it. All right. So we made our request one time. You can see there aren't multiple requests happening here. We got our data and we successfully rendered it. So that's how we can load up some data on the page load.
So if we use like another data from the same API, but we want to reload it in a different way in the same page.
Okay, give me an example of kind of what you mean though. I'm a little confused.
Like having
What?
the button and then that, it's not going to interfere with both being the same API.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so yeah, we could have it in both places. In which case, I would say let's just turn this into a function, right? If I want to have this GET request be triggered either by a button click here or some other event, I would just turn this whole thing into a function so that I can reuse it in both places. Okay. Any other questions on this before I have you guys read through it a little bit? This is your final opportunity.
Can you define use effect again?
Yeah, so use effect is a hook that we can use to cause some other code inside of it to run when we want to affect something outside of our immediate component. A side effect meaning that, again, it's outside the scope of our component. And a network request is considered a side effect, right? Because I'm hitting some outside service and I'm making that service respond to me.
You said the list of variable names. If one of those variables changes, that's what triggers the use effect.
Mm-hmm.
What if Axios get reject? So what are we gonna catch?
We would catch the error itself.
Okay, so it'll show something about the error.
Yeah, so for instance, let me just put in like a bad URL or something and let's see what that does. So https bad url.com. Yeah, and then maybe it exists. Well, so here it's saying here we got this error, right? So I got back a network error. That was my console log. So it doesn't exist, apparently. Name not resolved. So that domain name simply is not anywhere. Okay, cool. So there are a couple things you can do with this array. I can either put in certain things. What would happen if I put missions inside here? Yeah, it's saying like whenever missions changes, let's run the code inside here, which is going to cause another one of those loops, right? Because here I'm setting missions, which means that missions is going to change. I'll keep running this. So be careful about that. The empty array just means run this one time when the component first gets created, and then don't run it again. Because we're not watching for any other variables to change.
So could you run that to see what happens?
Sure. You see how I'm making all these, and look at the memory. Yeah, the memory footprint's getting out of control.
Is that infinity?
Let me stop it. Yeah, it's just gonna keep doing it. Okay, so watch out for that. The infinite loop. All right. Cool. So let's read through this guy. Lines 1 through 4. Who can?
We are importing React, and then we are importing use effect and use state from React.
What are these?
Those are hooks.
Good. And a hook is what?
Hook is
What kind of data type? Well, check down here. How are we using use state, for instance? Parentheses.
it's it's a.
Well, if I have parentheses at the end of it, it means
It's a
I'm
function.
invoking it, right? So both of these are functions.
Okay.
Okay? Keep going.
And then we write a function called missions. We don't pass anything to it.
Wait, did you talk about this though?
Oh,
Right,
sorry.
too?
We import access from how do you say that?
Axios.
Axios, and then function.
And where's the Axios coming from? The string there?
From the module,
Yes, very good. Cool.
and then function missions, and then const mission.
You don't have to keep going. So we created this function called missions. Is it taking in any props? No, right? Cool. Because all of the data that we're planning to get is going to be coming from an outside service, so we don't need to pass it down to this component. All right. Any other like questions about props? Kind of while we're at it, is the concept of props throwing anybody off?
I have a question to ask you about outside specific to the topics.
Okay, that's fine. All right, cool. So let's keep going. Lines 5 through 16. Max. Okay, what do we call this again when we're putting things inside of an array? No, they're not arguments because we're not calling a function over here on the left side, right? Well, let's look over on the right side first. So what's happening on the right side? We're not setting it. What are we doing? Invoking it, right? We're calling the function. What are we passing? Is it big enough? So what are we passing to the function? Empty array. Okay. Now what's going on the left side here? It sort of looks like I'm creating an array, but what am I really doing? A little help, Greg. I just woke him up. What's happening over here on the left side here? Okay, so yeah, sort of. So I called the useState function, I passed in an empty array, and what did this thing give me back? It gave me back an array that had two things inside of it, right? Those two things are the actual variable and then a function that will allow me to update that variable, all right? So when I do it this way, Francis, what am I doing? Somebody knows it, yes. Destructuring. Easy to lose sight of that destructuring stuff, right? Yes, Albert.
Out of curiosity again, does the variable name or does the method set have to match the variable name?
No.
So I could like set m or whatever.
This is the convention.
Yeah. Naturally, I don't follow it. But
So yeah, from a readability standpoint, stick with this. But you're absolutely right. I could call these whatever I want. And remember, that's how destructuring with arrays worked. Is that I can call them whatever I like. Yeah. Good. So the first element is going to be the thing, and then the second element is the update function. Yes.
So we are destructuring from the useState function.
From the result of calling the useState function.
So
right?
anything after
Calling
const,
useState gives me back this array that has two things inside of it.
and so anything after const is destructed. I can't say it.
Destructured.
Destructured.
Yeah, this means that we're destructuring these two elements, which means that's going to be the element that's at the 0 index, and this is the element that's at the 1 index.
And out of curiosity, what would it look like calling the useState function if you weren't destructuring it?
Well, yeah, we tried that on the first day, I think, that when I introduced useState. So I did something like this, const result equals useState, passed in the array, and then we just logged out the result. Remember that at all? Okay, so it just showed us that there was an array that had two things in it.
Okay.
One was the item, and then the second one was the function. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Max. So we're done with that part. That was probably the hardest part. Let's get down to line 12. A hook. Yes. What are we doing with it?
It looks like we're trying to call the data from an Axios state.
Well, hold on. What are we doing with use effect, though? There's a set of parentheses there. What does that tell us?
So we're calling something?
Calling a function. We're calling the use effect function. And what are we passing to it?
The Axios Get data?
No. What's the argument here? I want you guys to get comfortable reading these arrows and kind of know what is that. Okay, a little help for that. What's the arrow? Tell me.
That's the callback.
The arrow means that this is a function, right? So I'm not passing it Axios, I'm passing it a function and I'm telling it, this is what I want you to run on my behalf, right? Okay. Cool. Now inside, so let's assume that this thing has been invoked now. What's going on inside our function? So line 13.
That's where we're calling the API data. We're getting the API data.
Okay, so we're calling this Axios method get, which means let's make a request. Okay, and I'm passing it the URL that I want to get back data from, right? And then what's this dot then? What does that mean?
So I guess after we get the data, we're going to be using the response function to send it to the set missions function.
So this is actually still an anonymous function. It doesn't really have a name, right? But we're giving it an entire function definition and we're saying, when the data comes back, I want you to run this entire function right here that goes from 14 all the way to 16. Okay? And then inside that, what are we going to do on line 15?
Is that putting the data in the set missions function? We're using the set mission.
We're calling it, right?
Yeah.
You see the parentheses again, so we're calling the set missions function. What are we passing in?
Response data.
Response.data. That was the actual data that we got back from SpaceX, right? Okay, what does .catch mean?
I want to say that was for the errors.
It was, exactly. So if something went wrong, let's just log out the error for now. Okay, let's go down here to this return statement. Lawrence, what's going on here in our return statement? So take us from like, I don't know. Take us through this part actually. This is what's interesting, right?
On 31?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was through a mission,
Okay.
and we said TR's key is a mission ID,
Right.
and
Why was I able to use that instead of the index?
what's that again?
Why am I using that instead of the index? You know how we've kind of used I a lot?
Because it's unique.
Yeah, because I already know that this is going to be unique, so it's safe. All right. Good?
And the same TD is the ID. Because the table we want to have ID. First is ID, second is name.
Right. Yeah, so we're just outputting each one of these attributes for each mission, and then we're going to loop through everything. Good. Yes.
So the key at the mission ID, the key is the actual, like the object from the data of the API. But what is?
Well, that's not an object. Remember that mission ID was a string,
Okay.
right?
What is the key doing then? What is the purpose of the key?
Remember, it's to silence those React warnings. It doesn't like when we loop through things and we don't provide a unique
Oh,
key.
okay, so we used to use a key and then just ID. In this case, we're going to use mission ID.
Yeah, because here I have this thing that I know is already unique. So yeah, I don't need to use I can just rely on some ID they gave me. Yes?
You said we need key whenever we loop through something. What if we don't use the map function or for each function? What if we're just using a regular for loop to use the different key?
Can you give me an example of how you would render out a bunch of JSX without using map? Like if iterating through an array, how are you going to render that without using map?
For I.
Missions.length.
What?
Mission for I equals 0, going up to missions.length.
I plus plus.
Well, I mean, not exactly.
No, this is always how we're going to iterate through things in JSX is using
Oh, in
map.
JSX.
So for loops
Yeah.
don't work in JSX?
Like if I just want to do like I do 0 or something, not exactly API, but I'm just talking like kind of generally.
No, you can't do that. You can't do like a regular. You can't do a regular for loop
Really?
inside JSX. Because remember, this is like a very HTML-ish like thing, right? Now we can use some regular JavaScript in here, but ultimately if you're trying to render something, what we're trying to do here, let's just kind of like step back and see what's going on. We're trying to take each mission that's in our array and transform it in some particular way, right? So I'm taking each mission and I'm turning it into a table row that has two TD elements inside of it. This is a transformation right here. Okay, so like what you were talking about, a regular for loop doesn't really transform anything, right? I mean, it could maybe if you were trying to transform something, but it's not going to render out here the way that you'd expect.
So
It's not going to work.
no traditional for loops.
No traditional for loops in here.
So basically, .map does more than just iterating through an array and does like, whatever until.
So it takes care of the iteration for us, so that we don't need to worry about all that,
Right.
for, let I,
Yeah.
whatever. And then the other thing is that it's going to apply whatever function we give it to that data one element at a time.
Okay.
So we've got this function that we've created here. In fact, if we want to kind of simplify this, how could we bring this outside of our JSX?
A function?
Yeah, I could just create this as a function, right?
Main function.
Yeah, let's just name it up here. So we'll call this function. I'll call it mission.
Mission and missions. It's like the new.
Exactly. Mission.
Okay, so I'm going to take in a mission, and then I'm going to return out this thing right here, right? Okay, so could I just pass in mission here as my callback function? No problem, right? Yeah, so just showing you how you can kind of break things out into their own little subcomponents if you need to. All right. Any other questions? Axios, use effect.
So Axios,
These are the two big ones today.
Axios is just basically is built into the React, right?
No, it's a library that we install.
Oh,
So remember I did
yeah.
npm install Axios?
And it
Yeah.
applies for every other project that we do, right?
Yes.
For the second argument on Axios, can you give us an example how it could be handy using it? Meaning, if we pass in missions, it's gonna loop infinity or infinity loop.
Right.
I mean, use effect. Sorry.
Well, think about if I wanted some code to run only if or if I want to make an API request only if some particular variable has changed, it might come in handy. Like for instance, we'll see this later on in our assignments, but let's say that I was on some particular component that had an ID that was being given to it. Now here, our component is not taking in any props, right? But what if I was taking in a prop that was an ID or something like that, right? And what if that ID changed?
So when it
Wouldn't I want to
changes,
then go make a new API request because that ID changed?
so
That's
that
a
doesn't work.
use case for
Oh,
it.
so we could set inside that variable. There could be something from like the API. So like if the API updates, then we can have it automatically refresh.
It's not that the API itself would update. It might be that, I've changed routes or something, but the component that was being rendered was still the same one. It only wants a different ID. It's passing down a different ID to me, which means that it's not going to like recreate the component It's just going to re-render it with the new ID, which means that would trigger my use effect call. You guys will see this in your assignments when you do the Luke API walker one. So yeah, a use case for that will
Can we
emerge.
see a demo of that
We're gonna see it eventually.
right now?
You guys aren't even there yet. You want demos that are like in the distance, man.